Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Millicent Walker. First, the headlines. Ukrainian forces accuse Russia of firing during the civilian evacuation of the Mariupol steelworks after a car was hit. As President Zelensky addresses Chatham House think tank, describes situation in Mariupol as torture with starvation. Conservatives lose flagship council after 40 years as scandals bite in local elections. And the US limits use of J&J's COVID vaccine on blood clot risks. Welcome to The World Today. But first, we begin with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Germany says it will deliver 7 self-propelled howitzers to Ukraine, and this is according to the defense minister in a further reversal of a long-time policy not to send heavy weapons to war zones due to the country's Nazi past. The howitzer delivery, on top of 5 such artillery systems the Netherlands had already pledged, was another sign of Berlin heeding pressure at home and abroad for it to help Ukraine fend off a Russian invasion. The heavy weapons will come out of Bundeswehr inventories and be delivered as soon as they emerge from maintenance over the next weeks. Kyiv had requested 12 howitzers and swift training to quickly deploy the weapons on the battlefield. Of course, according to the training of the first group of some 20 Ukrainian troops, howitzer is expected to start next week in the German town of Ida Obstin. And China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, has called on the international communities to step up efforts to promote a ceasefire and minimize the humanitarian impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. When speaking at a UN Security Council meeting on the situation in Ukraine, Mr. Zhang also stressed that the lessons from that crisis are profound and deserve serious reflections. According to him, the continuation of the war and all-round and bottomless sanctions are making people of all countries, especially developing countries, pay higher food prices, oil prices, and other heavy costs. He added that the arbitrary seizure and freezing of foreign exchange reserves of other countries is tantamount to weaponizing economic interdependence and bringing more uncertainties and risks to the world economy and international relations. China is calling on the international community to strengthen macro policy coordination and work together to effectively manage the negative spillover effect of the conflict. In the meantime, Moscow believes that it can commit war crimes with impunity because of its status as a nuclear power. This is according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in an address to the Chatham House think tank. He says, quote, the Russians do not believe they can be held responsible for war crimes because they have the power of a nuclear state. When asked about the situation in Mariupol, Mr. Zelensky said this is not a military event, but torture with starvation. He blamed the beastly attitude, he called it, of the Russian military in Mariupol on decades of anti-Ukrainian propaganda. Meanwhile, an analyst from the international think tank Chatham House said that the Kremlin did not anticipate that fighting in Ukraine would still be ongoing on Russia's Mainline Victory Day. According to an associate fellow in the Russia-Eurasia program, the annual commemoration had become a cornerstone of Russian President Vladimir Putin's premiership. Due to the conflict in Ukraine, the associate fellow told reporters that this year will be different in that attendees from other countries are unlikely to present, which only highlights Russia's isolation.
Commemoration of the Second World War, which is called the Great Patriotic War, is very important for Putin and for the Kremlin, for the Russian elites. It has been turned into a cornerstone of Russian sort of greatness, the narrative of Russia's greatness, heroism and sacrifice. For many Russians, those especially who want to believe in what the Kremlin is saying, this is the repetition of the Great Patriotic War in terms of liberating Europe and standing up to evil of fascism in Ukraine. There would be sort of commemorations, a day off, and there would be a big parade in Moscow. And that parade would really celebrate Russian military might. So it's well prepared, well rehearsed. And normally we would see a lot of international leaders flocking to Moscow and joining the celebrations. This has really sort of been disrupted since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea and Russia sort of sponsored separatists in the Donbass. But nevertheless, until before the pandemic, effectively, those international leaders would come to Moscow. This year, it's not going to happen. There will be a big parade as normal. However, there will be no international presence. So this emphasizes the isolation.
And like we mentioned in our headline, Ukrainian forces have accused Russia of firing during the civilian evacuation of the Mariupol steelworks, with the car being hit. This is as officials there say. There are about 200 civilians, including at least 20 children, trapped with Ukrainian fighters under the Mariupol plant. Andriy Yermak, chief of staff to Ukraine's president, says almost 500 civilians have been safely moved from the city since a UN-led rescue operation began. Vladimir Putin says Ukraine should order its fighters in the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol to surrender. Capturing the whole of the shattered southern city, he says, would be symbolic for Moscow ahead of its May 9th Victory Day celebration. Well, here's more on day 71 of the invasion.
Many people forced to leave their hometowns due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict felt depressed and devastated as the crisis drags on. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has displaced more than 12 million Ukrainians who have fled their homes. 7 million of them are estimated to be internally displaced within the country. The internally displaced people are able to apply for monthly funding, employment and housing, but the tragedy that befell the country has brought untold misery to all. Ksenia and her son are among those who were forced to flee their homes. They fled from the eastern Donetsk region to Kiev as her husband joined the army in February.
I desperately want to go home. I wake up every morning and feel like it's a nightmare.
In the meantime, Russia-backed forces in Mariupol continued their assault against Ukrainian forces holed up in the vast Azovstal steelworks. Supported by the Russian army, the separatist military units used tank fire and artillery barrages in an attempt to break stubborn Ukrainian resistance at Azovstal. An estimated 200 civilians remain trapped underground in the plant with little food or water. A member of Russian-backed forces said there was little left to do to capture the sprawling Azovstal plant in the southern Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, where Ukrainian fighters and civilians remain trapped. The full capture of Mariupol, which has been besieged by Russian forces for weeks, is key to Moscow's plans to cut Ukraine off from the Sea of Azov and create a land bridge connecting Russian-annexed Crimea to Russia. An exhibition titled NATO Chronicle of Cruelty is being staged at a Moscow museum to display the history of the US-led military bloc in string-up troubles across the world and lay bare its destructive role in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Inside the exhibition hall of the State Central Museum of Contemporary History, the sound of bombers is resounding incessantly as a reminder of the trauma that NATO has scarred the world. The Russian Ministry of Defense also displayed some NATO weapons and equipment captured from the Ukraine front line. Meanwhile, Roberto Marquez, a Mexican painter, works on a new painting at the destroyed bridge crossing the Irpin River from the town of Irpin, just 20 kilometers northwest of Kiev. The bridge was blown up by Ukrainian forces to block or at least slow Russian armor reaching Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. A military commander in Moscow said on Friday that the goal of Russia's new phase of the war is to take full control of southern and eastern Ukraine and connect the Donbas region with Crimea via land.
And Denmark's defense minister told Danish troops stationed at a Latvian NATO base today that their role was to defend values, freedom and way of life for Latvia, Denmark and all alliance members. Denmark sent troops to the Baltics region to bolster the alliance's eastern flank amid the Russian build-up at Ukraine's border and the ensuing invasion of the country. The Scandinavian country also sent F-16 fighter jets beginning a NATO air policing mission in Lithuania. In retaliation, Russia announced it had declared 7 employees of the Danish embassy in Moscow persona non grata in response to a similar move by Copenhagen last month, with Moscow also objecting to Denmark's military assistance to Ukraine.
But we have a very bad experience with our neighboring country, Russia. Let's not hide it. Now they are waging a war against our friends and allies in Ukraine. They're killing, they're raping, and they're ready to go further if somebody will allow them. Our duty here, for my army, for the Latvian armed forces, and for our allies and for you, is to guarantee that Russians do not get wrong thoughts in their mind. So they see that we are ready here to defend the borders of NATO, borders of European Union, and of course borders of Latvia, which is hosting you.
About 200 kilometers from here to the east lies the Russian border. It's not only a border between two countries, it's a border between two different worlds. Between Western democracies, freedom of speech, human rights, and the rule of law on one side, and a ruthless regime on the other. Your mission is now to defend our values, our freedom and our way of life, for Latvia, for Denmark, for all of NATO.
Amnesty International has said there was compelling evidence that Russian troops had committed war crimes, including extrajudicial executions of civilians when they occupied an area outside Ukraine's capital in February and also in March. The rights group said in a report that civilians also suffered abuses, such as reckless shootings and torture at the hands of Russian forces during their failed onslaught on Kyiv in the early stages of the invasion, February 24. We'll bring you that report shortly. In the meantime, the proposed embargo on Russian oil from the EU remains a big story there, especially now that some Central European states, such as Hungary, have signaled opposition. Well, Deutsche Welle correspondent Arthur Sullivan joins me now from Berlin with more. Hi, Arthur. The EU has proposed this embargo on Russian oil, but the plan is being held up by some member states. What's the latest?
So on Wednesday, the EU announced its plans for an oil embargo, and this was part of the latest round of sanctions aimed at hitting Moscow and Russia since the war in Ukraine began. Now, the latest is that there is quite significant opposition within the EU from some member states to this proposed oil embargo, particularly coming from some of the Central and Eastern European states, such as Hungary, Czech Republic and Slovakia. Now, the issue for those countries is that they're landlocked, they're quite a long way from the sea, and significant amount of the oil that they import from Russia comes via pipeline. And for starters, most of the oil that they import at all comes from Russia, around 2/3 in the case of Hungary. So they say that they want an exemption for oil that enters the country via pipeline. Now, the EU has proposed in its main proposal that all oil imports from Russia will cease by the end of this year, 2022. There is the possibility of an extra year for countries like Hungary, but just this morning the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, has said that Hungary will not accept the proposal in its current form, and that it does require a new proposal, which he clearly means there that they would need this pipeline oil to be exempted. So that's the latest. The EU is working on getting this deal done.
Reluctant to back embargoes on Russian energy, but appears to be shifting. But has it moved enough?
Yes, Germany's position has had to shift substantially. So Germany has received a lot of criticism, and its new Chancellor, indeed, Olaf Scholz, has received a lot of criticism since the invasion began for not being perceived to have done enough to support Ukraine. Now, one of the big things that it has been under pressure to do is to support this oil embargo, and indeed an embargo on gas. And slowly but surely its position has shifted as more evidence has arisen from Ukraine of the kind of crimes that Russia have been committing there. So Germany is now quite heavily behind the oil embargo, even though business leaders have warned that cutting off supplies of Russian oil to a country which is, like some of those other countries I mentioned earlier, heavily dependent on it, that it will damage the economy, it will hurt consumers. But Germany is now supporting it. It is, looking for as many alternative supplies of energy as it possibly can find in the 6 months or so it has until the end of the year before this embargo would come into effect. But Germany's position would appear to have shifted substantially, that it will now be able to accept this embargo.
Question in a lot of people's mind is, can the EU pull this off?
Well, it's a very big challenge for the EU to be able to pull this off. The EU has to do two things, really. First of all, it has to get countries that I mentioned earlier, like Hungary, on board with it. So that's the first big challenge, to simply get the proposal through, to get all 27 member states. And remember, all 27 member states must agree for this to pass, to get them all to go on board with it, whatever that requires, whether it requires those exemptions we discussed. The second thing it needs to do, once that's agreed, which in itself is a big challenge, is to be able for the bloc to live with it, to live with no more Russian oil. Until quite recently, around 1/4 of all oil that came into the European Union was from Russia. That's a lot to replace, and replacing it is difficult and costly. So there has been, a lot of warnings to consumers that prices, when you're filling up your car, is going to go up. Businesses are going to come up under renewed pressure to do this. And so that's the really, really big challenge for the EU and for its member states and for its governments, to find alternative supplies so that the damage to consumers is kept to a minimum. Although they have repeatedly warned several leaders that it's just going to be something that consumers are going to have to deal with. They're going to have to accept some of the pain that comes with this, and that is the price that must be paid for dealing with Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and to adequately hit the Kremlin where it hurts.
Many thanks, Arthur Sullivan, Deutsche Welle correspondent, joining me there from Berlin. And Russia says it will not use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. This is the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Alexei Zaitsev, accusing those who suggested Moscow might launch a nuclear strike of deliberate lies. Zaitsev said the use of nuclear weapons by Russia, a risk that Western officials have publicly discussed, was not applicable to what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister has said his country wanted a special justice court to be established, prosecuting Russian aggression and other violations of international law. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said such a court would fill the gap, as he said no jurisdiction was in charge of prosecuting the crime of aggression. Speaking at a Lithuanian conference in war crimes, he added the court is not meant to replace any of the existing international courts and tribunals dealing with various aspects of Russia's aggression. He said the initiative is getting large support globally, with a petition reaching 2 million signatures. Coming up on The World Today. The Rock, the largest white diamond to ever come to auction, to fetch as much as $30 million at Christie's sale. Welcome back. Some French have raised concerns, saying they feared a new social crisis a day before President Emmanuel Macron's inauguration for his second term. Mr. Macron was re-elected in April despite strong opposition to his pro-business policies and a proposal to raise the retirement age from 62 to 65. Others were hopeful, saying they expected this mandate to be more social than the previous one, such as Alassane, who was a school vice principal for a southern city. To implement measures from his program, Mr. Macron would need to keep a majority in the June parliamentary elections. An alliance of left-wing parties has signed this week to try to beat Macron's party, renamed Renaissance. The first round of the election for France's lower house is set to take place June 12, with a runoff on June 19. Let's go over to the United Kingdom, where Labour has gained several councils from the Tories, who have suffered the loss of hundreds of council seats across England in results so far. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his party is back on track to succeed at the next general election. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has conceded the Tories had a tough time in some areas, but argues that results are mixed overall. Well, here's our London correspondent Juliana Lainka with more.
The sun was shining in Britain today, but yesterday's elections were held against a gloomy backdrop of the growing cost of living crisis. Rising bills and Partygate dominated conversation on the doorstep, but the despair and disgust towards central government in political commentary doesn't appear to have been reflected in local communities. The Conservatives have lost control in some strongholds, and opposition parties have made modest gains elsewhere.
This has been a tough night for Conservatives in some parts of the country, and in other parts of the country we're actually moving forward. And so for midterm, it's quite interesting that it's a mixed set of results.
The trust that we're rebuilding, that's putting us on the road to number 10, on the road to that general election. Yes. That change this last 2 years has been really hard for us as a party, but we've done it. We've built those solid foundations. We've won here in Barnet. We've won across London. We're winning from coast to coast.
Three key London councils that have been Conservative for a long time. You've got Westminster since 1964, that's the last time Labour won that. Then you've got Wandsworth, 1978, the last time Labour won that. They've both gone to Labour now, and Barnet, which Labour have never held. And these are really sort of key areas because London is obviously the heart of the UK, it's the capital, and these are places that have voted Conservative over the last few decades. So big wins there for Labour. Conservative councillors blaming obviously Boris Johnson, the Westminster government, saying that these are not local issues, this is not their fault.
Apart from those three key areas in London, Woolwich in the southeast is another area that the central government appears to have lost the support of the public.
There is a lack of understanding about how to deliver on promises around cost of living crisis. There's a lack of understanding of how to ensure that people can still survive on, just looking after their own businesses. You'll see in the Woolwich area particularly, there are a lot of Afrocentric sort of businesses that are thriving, by the way, doing very well. But the pressures that we're seeing locally are going to make it very hard for them to survive moving forward.
London, however symbolically important, isn't representative of England, and it appears as if the country has remained loyal to the Prime Minister, despite all of the efforts from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer.
Labour has been a little bit quiet. They've been timid about being too critical of the government, especially during the pandemic, so they haven't really managed to make a name for themselves and provide a clear vision for what they want in the country. I'm hoping that will come soon from Keir Starmer.
There is still a long way to go until we get the full results of yesterday's local elections, but it appears so far that some of the Conservative bloodbaths anticipated by political commentators and pollsters hasn't really happened. Yes, the Labour Party have managed to take significant Conservative strongholds in London, and that is significant because, of course, this is the commercial capital of the United Kingdom. However, the apocalyptic demise of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is yet to be seen. Juliana Olayinka, reporting for Channels TV News in London.
And Juliana indeed joins us now with more on that. Juliana, thanks again. I mean, what do the results coming in say about the Prime Minister's political fortunes?
Well, the results are looking very, very good. He has won 2 seats, 1 in London, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in Manchester. He has won 2 seats in Manchester, 1 in
Good afternoon, Millicent. Pretty mixed set of results, and I think the story of last night's local election is really a story of two struggling parties trying to retain some power. I think going into the election, lots of MPs up and down Britain were hoping that the result would be a referendum on a Partygate. It had at least dominated political headlines for weeks up into the running, and then of course we've got the cost of living crisis that's squeezing households in the UK that already had struggled because of the pandemic, but we haven't really got the reaction that we were anticipating. I think the key region to mention, of course, has got to be London, where I am right now, which is a left-leaning city. We know that we've got Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. He was a former Labour politician, and he serves the Labour Party. And there are those two key areas that have been lost by the Conservative government, one being Westminster, again where I am now, and one being Wandsworth. They've held those constituencies for a very long time. But I think it's really important for our viewers to recognise that, unfortunately, London is not representative of England. And England today, even though counting still is ongoing, remains firmly in the hands of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister. For some reason, even though there was so much ammunition, so many bad headlines against the Prime Minister, it just didn't appear as if the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, was able to gain that momentum enough that would push people, particularly outside of the capital, in those red wall seats that were famously taken by a Prime Minister in the 2019 general election. They didn't collapse. They remain Conservative. So, yes, a very mixed set of results. But as I said in my report, those apocalyptic headlines of the demise of Prime Minister Boris Johnson sadly just hasn't happened for those, of course, who are not friendly with the Prime Minister.
And Juliana, a bit of breaking news surrounding Sir Keir Starmer, rather alarming. What's the reaction been in Westminster?
Yes, breaking news that was just released hours ago is that Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour opposition party, will now be investigated by Durham police. This is linked to a Downing Street, well, not a Downing Street, a Durham a gathering that took place in April 2021. And now, if our viewers cast their minds back to that time, the United Kingdom was still pretty much in lockdown. There was restrictions against gatherings indoors, and a gathering certainly took place. This has been on the cards for some months now, because we know there's been slinging matches in the House of Commons about Partygate and the scandals surrounding Boris Johnson. But there was this one picture which is called Keir Beer. It's a picture of Sir Keir Starmer drinking a beer through a window, and he's always denied that was a socialised gathering. He always said it was just a very small break during a time that the Labour Party were working very hard. But since these allegations have first come out, more revelations have been revealed. We know that there are up to 30 Labour MPs or people that had worked with the Labour Party in attendance that night, and also a curry was ordered. So they were certainly eating and drinking. And just when Sir Keir Starmer felt he had come off a pretty monumentous win in London because of those local elections, he's got this pretty, I would say, astounding breaking news that he will now be investigated. This is a political nightmare for him, and certainly a story that I'm sure Boris Johnson and the rest of Whitehall will be significantly happy with. So it's safe to say that people can get their popcorn ready for Prime Minister's questions when they return next week, Wednesday, because there is so much to unfold. We know the Labour Party have called for the resignation of the Prime Minister. What are they going to say now that its own leader, Sir Keir Starmer, will be investigated by police?
Indeed, the popcorn, very important, and it will be interesting to hear what the Prime Minister would have to say. And this is also interesting that, you know, it's all coming out now, the polls and results still being expected. Do you think we might still get some surprises at the end of the day?
Goodness me, there is always going to be a surprise when you're talking about politics in Britain in 2022, Millicent. Some key areas that I didn't mention, because lots of the focus is always about the capital city, London, and so it should be. This is the commercial hub. But counting is still ongoing in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Those are really important parts of the United Kingdom, and there are some significant concerns, particularly across from the Irish Sea in the island of Ireland, that Sinn Féin may indeed take a lot of the majority of those local seats from the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party, that are really keen to make sure that the United Kingdom doesn't break up. Results are still coming in. The numbers are still being counted, but it does appear as if Sinn Féin are making significant ground. That is going to spell lots of trouble for the Prime Minister, because, you know, the Northern Ireland Agreement and the Northern Ireland troubles, that the Good Friday Agreement, I should say, and some of the troubles that we've had in the island of Ireland, of course, have got significant ramifications for geopolitics, not just in the United Kingdom, but around the world. We know that Joe Biden, the US president, has always been keen to ensure that that Good Friday Agreement stays in hold. And then, of course, in Scotland, we know that the Scottish Democrats, they have been asking for a referendum on their independence for months and months now. Are they going to be able to take more local councillor seats from the Conservative Party? It does appear that way. But, again, it's far too early to say. At the moment, as the Westminster bubble, Millicent, always does, they are focusing on London. And so far, not much has changed. However, it does appear as if the Conservative Party are losing strongholds in an area that they represent. Westminster is in London. Lots of these MPs do live in London, and the fact that it is painted red tonight, I'm sure, will be sending shivers down the spine of the Prime Minister.
And perhaps, Juliana, before we let you go, I mean, looking at, you know, the results that have come in, and this is against the headlines, national, international, what is local, how would you say, you know, juxtaposing that with how the parties fared?
I didn't catch the last part of your question, but in terms of how this midterm election looks, it's not great. Going back to what I said at the beginning of our discussion, I think lots of MPs, and I think really the British public, were hoping that the results today would determine the future of Prime Minister Boris Johnson and where the Conservative Party will be going. That hasn't happened. For some reason, the populist leader is still surviving on his 9 lives. They just keep on maintaining them. But then again, as well, I think, you know, the fact that you can couple those mixed results with the fact that the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, is now going to be investigated by the police is just absolutely shocking, particularly, and I know you've been watching Prime Minister's Questions, Millicent, he has been in the front and centre of calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He has been listing all of the constituents that he's aware of that have lost loved ones during the pandemic because they were sticking to the rules. And according to the police who are investigating these claims, Sir Keir Starmer didn't stick to the rules too. What does this say about the state of British politics? Britain is supposed to be held as a beacon of democracy in the 21st century, and 2 of its most powerful politicians are being accused of breaking the rules during lockdown. It's absolutely shocking. And unfortunately, the results of yesterday's election don't set a clear path for what is likely to be a really difficult couple of months. Yesterday, we had that really gloomy warning from the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey saying that the country is likely to hit a recession by the end of the year. Household incomes are being squeezed by more than they have been in a generation. We have to go back to the 50s to see a time where Britons were struggling to pay their bills and buy their groceries as they are now. So it's not looking great, but as I said, all is still to play for. Lots of election results, ballots, papers are still being counted. So perhaps over the next couple of days, we'll get a clearer picture about what the political map looks like in the UK. But we'll just have to wait and see what party leaders have to say come Wednesday, when all of those MPs who are vying to keep their seats when the next general election comes up will have to report about some of these pretty abysmal results.
All right, Juliana, we look forward, of course, to the future of British politics, and we look to you for those updates on the results. Thanks a lot, Juliana, for us live from Westminster. Thank you. Meanwhile, voters in the British capital have used the elections to express anger over the cost of living crisis, fines imposed on the Prime Minister for breaking his own COVID-19 lockdown rules. We heard a number of that from our correspondent. Now, Felix Morrison, a furniture restorer, said he voted conservative tactically because they had pledged to keep council tax low in the borough. Close to tears as she spoke, Daisy Mitchell said she wasn't able to say goodbye to her grandparents who died during the pandemic.
I think to be honest, I think that they're a terrible party. But what I did like is the fact that they were going to keep tax council rates lower. That's why I voted for the Conservatives. Usually I'm a Lib Dem voter, but in the council election, that's why I voted Conservative.
Just because he didn't follow his own rules, so a lot of us did, and people didn't see family members for a long time. So I think a lot of people go, well, why can't you follow your rules? We stuck to it. So yeah, I think people go, that's it, enough. We've had enough now. We want someone to listen to us and kind of hear our says and stuff.
I'm pretty happy with the result. It's who I voted for, so yeah, especially since I've just moved to the area, it's quite nice that we've made a change this quick, for my well-being at least.
I hope he's going to change some things in the council, because we need, everything is increased. If you see bills, every kind of bill, supermarkets, everything increased, and I think we need a new party to see what's going to happen.
Away from the UK to the US, where its health regulator says it's limiting the use of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine for adults due to the risk of a rare blood clotting. This is a rare blood clotting syndrome, the latest setback to the shot that has been eclipsed by rivals. The Food and Drug Administration says the J&J shot, which received US clearance in February 2021 for adults, can be administered in cases where authorized or approved COVID-19 vaccines are not accessible, or if an individual is less keen on using the other two shots. J&J is one of the 3 vaccines in use in the United States. The other 2 are from Moderna and Pfizer. The vaccine maker said it has updated the US COVID-19 vaccine fact sheet to warn about the risk of thrombosis with its rare but potentially life-threatening condition. Use of the J&J shot has been weak in high-income countries, hurt by reports of rare potential deadly blood clots, production issues, including an accidental mix-up of ingredients by a contract manufacturer, and concerns about efficacy. Still to come on the program, we bring you China's updates in terms of their COVID policy. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Staying with the coronavirus pandemic, over in China, Beijing streets remain near empty today, with scores of bus and subway routes staying closed for the 3rd day as part of tightened COVID curbs to cope with a rising number of cases. The Chinese capital city of 22 million people on Wednesday shut about 15% of its transportation network, which included more than 60 subway stations and 158 bus routes. Even though Beijing residents were given a break today after 3 consecutive days of mandatory mass testing, long lines formed at testing sites as weekly COVID tests would still be required from residents to enter office buildings and public venues and take subways or buses. Beijing has reported dozens of new cases a day for about 2 weeks since its outbreak emerged. Today, officials said they detected 72 cases on May the 5th, the highest number so far. And we're back in the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth plans to attend major celebrations to mark her 70 years on the British throne next month. But 2 out of her favourite Princes Andrew and Harry will be excluded from one traditional event. The 96-year-old Britain's longest reigning monarch marked 7 decades as Queen in February, and 4 days of Platinum Jubilee events to recognise that landmark are being held at the start of June. One feature of all major royal occasions is a gathering of the royal family to wave at crowds from the palace balcony. But the Queen has decided neither her son, Prince Andrew, nor grandson, Prince Harry, will be there this time. After careful consideration, the Queen has decided this year's traditional trooping, the colour balcony appearance, will be limited to Her Majesty and those members of the royal family. This is according to a statement from the Buckingham Palace spokesperson.
And come back stronger. Thank you, my love. The world needed to be reminded of the power of the human spirit, the ability to heal and the strength of resilience that allows us to recover and come back stronger. And we're doing it here.
And the White House has a new press secretary. President Biden named Karine Jean-Pierre as his new top spokesperson, the first time a black person has held the role. Well, Ms. Jean-Pierre has served as the administration's principal deputy press secretary since Mr. Biden was elected. She will replace outgoing press secretary Jen Psaki in the top role at the end of next week. Ms. Psaki has taken to Twitter, where she called her successor a remarkable woman with a moral core. She joins Vice President Kamala Harris, incoming Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Domestic Policy Council Chair Susan Rice, UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and a handful of other officials and judges in prominent roles. And Kunle Adewale is bringing smiles to Nigerians living in elderly people's homes by letting them watch their favourite musicians come alive through virtual reality. The social entrepreneur, visual artist, is the founder of Tender Arts Nigeria, an organisation focusing on therapeutic arts.
Onatola Onajubi is having a great time at the elderly care home in Lagos, Nigeria. Onajubi is wearing a virtual reality headset, allowing the 77-year-old to listen to and watch some of his favorite musicians and their music videos.
It looked as if I was watching Richard on stage. It gave me a feeling I can never forget.
Onajubi is not enjoying the joyful experience alone. Fellow elderly care home client Moradeyo Ajibade is also filled with joy and nostalgia after trying on the VR unit.
I've never even seen this VR before, but this is my first time of using it. That's why I stood up and began dance. When the music entered my brain, it changed my swagger.
Kunle Adewale is an artist who focuses on what he refers to as therapeutic art projects. The 40-year-old founded Tender Arts Nigeria in 2013, a non-profit social enterprise that has carried out initiatives in India, Nigeria, South Africa, and other African countries. After the death of his parents, Adewale decided to make helping seniors live the rest of their lives in happiness a priority.
The virtual reality stuff is more of the gaming thing for the youth, but there's so much potential that it can offer in the place of health and improving their well-being and their health status as well. So that is why I started this. And beyond that as well, I feel like the virtual reality can help seniors to really, in place of mental health and also in the place of brain health as well. Some of these elderly ones actually have dementia, which is known as memory loss as well. But what is important is that the virtual reality can help them to connect maybe with a popular musician they grew up knowing or listening to. So reliving that moment, reliving that experience and finding expression, being able to dance and move their bodies, in a way that it just makes them happy in that moment, and it's fine. It might be short, but it's important for them.
Mudupe Augusto runs the elderly care home and insists that people's attitudes need to change.
You find a lot of old people getting missing, getting lost, while trying to just take a walk, and then they can't find their way back home. So with all those happening around, we need to educate people and let them know that old people are not witches. Because they have white hair does not mean they're a witch. They have lived life. They were once young, vibrant, active, just like we are.
And while VR can't replace visits by family and short trips outside the home, Adewale's project is a safe way to put smiles on faces and get people dancing. Adewale and many others who operate in the VR space say use of technology got a boost during the pandemic and the restrictions that have come with it. Adewale's Art in Medicine project also supports people living with sickle cell anemia.
I don't care. I don't care.
So lovely to see them enjoying themselves. And finally on the world today, a 228.31 carat white diamond called the Rock, the largest ever seen throughout auction market history, could fetch $30 million during Christie's sale in Geneva on the 11th of May. The white gemstone was fined and polished in South Africa over 2 decades ago. Returning for the third time since its mining in 1901, the Red Cross, a historically important fancy intense yellow cushion-shaped 205 carat diamond, will also go under the hammer on the same day, May 11. The fancy brilliant cut diamond gets its yellow color from nitrogen atoms. The head of Christie's jewelry department in Geneva, Max Fawcett, said the estimated selling price is between $7 to $10 million, and that part of the proceeds from the sale will go to the International Red Cross. Fawcett said the diamond market is as stronger as it has been in a long time.
The first of which is a 228 carat pear-shaped diamond. It is the largest pear-shaped diamond ever certified by the GIA in its history. It is the largest colorless diamond ever to be offered at auction in history. So that really is a historic moment, to have a white diamond of over 200 carats. The shape is perfect. Often with these larger stones, they sacrifice some of the shape in order to keep the weight. This has a perfectly symmetrical pear-shaped form, and really is one of the rarest gems ever to be sold at auction. It is estimated between 20 to 30 million. People are always looking for the best, and if you have something that no one else has and that no one else can replace, the prices are always going to be high, and there's always buyers and always individuals who are looking to collect those kind of things. So will it necessarily be worn by the new owner? I don't know, and if they do, maybe they make a necklace. I think that it's obviously a very large stone, but you can't underestimate the rarity of that. It's just as rare as a Picasso, as a Manet, as a Richter, and there is big investment value in that as well. And I think a lot of the collectors we have, that is what they're looking for.
And it's still a girl's best friend. Well, that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent from Walker. Have a good evening.